Well, thanks for having me out today, guys. I'm very, very excited to be here. I have to be honest, though, I'm a little disappointed that there are not more costumes in the room, given all the arts and theater marketers. I almost wore mine. It was going to be a Big Bird outfit, but I'm glad I didn't now be the pariah out here. Well, hopefully you're getting all dressed up later, and happy Halloween to all of you. I'm going to dive right in here, but to give you, before I kind of get into it too much, I want to give you a bit of a background on the study itself. So. Our team at Google actually specializes in live events. We work, there's over 50 years of experience on the team that I work with, and Vinal actually is here in the audience as well, works on the team. And we work with everything from the sports industry all the way through to, of course, the arts and theater and performing arts industry, and also work with a lot of the ticketers in the industry. And about 2 years ago or so, we as a team sat down and we wanted to kind of just better understand how consumers interact with digital media in general, not even specific to Google, but just in general, what those touch points are in digital media that really ultimately lead to a purchase decision for a ticket. Because I think that's the most important thing that you guys as arts marketers are after, is really filling those seats and getting those butts and seats at the various theaters you work with. So in 2012, we commissioned Ipsos, and I'm sure all of you guys here, or most of you guys here, are probably very familiar with Ipsos, a very storied media company, or excuse me, research company based out of France there, and gave them kind of the thesis of what we're looking to do and what we're looking to accomplish. So we published that original study as an infographic on Google Think Insights. Anybody here has heard of that before? Raise your hand. Yeah? Okay, a couple of you. If you just Google, literally Google, and if you guys haven't heard of Google, then we have a thing. If you just Google Think Insights, and the first one was actually called The Path to Purchase for Live Events. And that was in 2012. This is the second iteration of that. We just came out with it in June this year. And the interesting thing about it is we actually want to take a look at how consumers have progressed in their relationship with digital and how that research has changed between 2012 and 2014, and what those digital touch points are and how they're really connecting with digital media. I first want to point out something here, and this is a big reason actually why we put together these studies in the past. I know most of you guys here don't work within the Broadway industry, but we have this kind of analogy in our team that as the Broadway industry goes, so does much of the performing arts industry. And so we took a look at the Broadway League report that basically says 86% of Broadway seats were filled in 2013. That still means that 1.9 million Broadway seats were left unfilled in 2013. And when you think about the average ticket price for a Broadway show, right around the $100 level, that's a huge amount of money that can make a show profitable almost immediately when they get up and running, and they can actually have that show have much longer run. And of course, pack the house for all those producers, the actors, the directors, the general managers who spent time putting that show together and really poured their heart out into it. So to make this study a little bit simpler and kind of put it in marketing perspective, I'm sure all of you guys here being marketers have heard of the marketing funnel. We like to kind of break it into 4 different categories. So we took the study itself and actually broke it into these 4 different categories. You don't have to write these down right now because I'll walk through obviously every single individual category. The C category being people who are fans of performing arts. And that is a very big bucket that's out there. Think being people who are thinking about going to or attending a performing arts show. Do being the people who are actually buying a ticket for a performing arts show, and care being people who have either attended a show or are at the show currently. And even more interesting, as we get into the care section, we think this is an area that is often neglected by performing arts marketers, because once you get them in the seat, they're already in the seat. They bought a ticket for your show. They're watching the show, they're hopefully having a great time at your show, but there's a lot you can do as tour marketers, which the data will show us here, to actually interact with and effectively get those people to come back and see more shows in the future. So diving right in, the C category is once again people who enjoy the performing arts. Very, very broad bucket. The interesting thing is the study showed us and the Ipsos data showed us, and by the way, actually I should have mentioned this before, this runs the gamut of demographic, so it's every age race. It runs from actually 18 to 64-year-olds, so it's not just the millennials we're talking to who are online. It's the whole broad, everybody who actually goes to a performing arts show. So we found that people, more so than any other category, any other medium out there, actually found out about a performing arts show from the internet itself. And this is important because a lot of times in conversations with arts and theaters and producers, which I have a lot myself, and I know all of you do as well, a lot of times it actually comes as a secondary, even tertiary part of the conversation when it comes to media and marketing. But it is where people are turning to the most when they're looking for information about performing arts activities and performing arts in general. Now this number looks a little bit low, and when you see anything in the teens in marketing, people kind of tend to brush it off. But it's actually a pretty big number when you put into perspective that one, it is actually trackable media. So these users we know saw this ad and actually recalled this ad as a result of going to a specific site and seeing that specific ad. So they actually recalled that ad. And when you compare that to the other traditional channels out there, TV, radio, print, newspaper, whatever it is, that is not necessarily trackable. We know that, of course, those people have impressions and probably saw it at some point in time, but the online aspect of the internet and the fact that people can specifically recall seeing an online advertisement 17% of the time for a performing arts show is a very big number, and you need to keep that in mind as marketers. Now, we looked at the other channels that people go to for performing arts specifically, and how they're accessing information on the various channels, because once again, we didn't want to look at this just as, hey, here's how people are searching, here's how people are researching on Google networks. We found that search social networks, which I don't remember, it was not social media, it's social networks, is influential at introducing people to that specific event. And that's because it's a conversation that people are having on social that with their broader audience, with everybody else out there who's in their social network, they're having a conversation with those people and giving them feedback about the various performing arts shows they've seen. But when it comes to video content, this is actually better at influencing consideration. And why that is the case, and this is why the YouTube folks that stepped up earlier gave a great talk on this. It's important to keep this in mind because we call this the sight, sound, and motion effect. And this means that people out there who are watching your show go to your live show because they have an amazing experience. They want to have an amazing experience at this show. And you as arts marketers have an opportunity to tap into that experience, that live experience, by creating content around that show to once again influence consideration and really have that impact on the research process for arts and theater ticket buyers. I also wanted to not just walk through all the data and kind of give you guys something actionable from this, because we are Google, of course, and we have a very large network of different ad opportunities out there for you guys as marketers. So what I'm going to walk through in each section, and of course I probably should have started this by saying this, is every time I walk through each section, I'm going to give you some kind of actionable items that you can take back in terms of paid advertising media that you can really implement very easily at the arts and theater level and as marketers to make this happen, to kind of talk to those people who, in this case, are the Cs out there who are performing arts fans, but don't necessarily know that they want to go to any specific show. So with C, we like to break it into two different buckets because this is much higher funnel. This is really just making them aware of the show and, of course, slightly influencing that consideration to attend a specific show. So video and display are the two main components of this. And anyone here not been on YouTube before? Okay, that's good. All right, you guys are very savvy. I'm proud of you. So if you have been on YouTube, you've definitely seen one of these TrueView video ads. They're great because you can actually skip them. And the best thing about it being a skippable ad format is that you can actually talk to qualified users. If somebody goes on there after 5 seconds, they are not fully engaged with whatever creative is out there or whatever messaging you're pushing out there, they can skip, which means they are not somebody who's necessarily interested in attending a performing arts event. And what we found with TrueView specifically is that it's better often to, yes, geo-target, to talk to people in your area about your show. So if somebody's going to a show in Des Moines, Iowa, it's good to actually talk to the people who are in the Des Moines, Iowa DMA, because more than likely somebody from New York City is not going to fly to Des Moines, Iowa to see this show unless it's the only up for this show, right? So what we found is to run actually, of course, geo-targeting with TrueView, but run it across broad categories. Because the reality is when we're talking to everybody who's a performing arts fan, they're not just arts and theater aficionados. They're not just people who love wine and good food. It's the broad category. And you can think about what you do on a daily basis, because everybody in this room are consumers, and you out there consuming anything from retail products to tickets to sports, etc. So you yourselves are fans of other things besides performing arts, and it's important to talk to everybody out there, and don't just disqualify these people simply because they also watch sports or they're only interested in food stuff on YouTube. It doesn't mean that they aren't performing arts lovers, but you give them the opportunity to skip it if they are not indeed engaged with the content you're pushing out there on TrueView. We did a really interesting case study, this is a little bit about a year ago now, I think, with one particular show, and the analogy we like to use is the glass slipper fit right with Cinderella. Because what they did is they actually reallocated a portion of their TV budget and dumped it specifically into TrueView to gauge the difference between what television did to drive ticket sales versus what TrueView did to drive ticket sales. And the numbers there are right in front of you. We actually saw a 12% increase immediately from running TrueView ads versus TV ads. And the great thing about this particular media, as is the case with any other digital media out there, is that it's trackable. Everything on digital is trackable. It's the bane of digital, and it's the best thing about digital. You can make impressions, you can have impressions out there, you can just have an impression be on someone, but it is also trackable to that action the user takes. And in the case of performing arts, it does work. TrueView does work, and it can drive ticket sales across the board because of that sight, sound, and motion, having the users connect with the show, the live experience, at their desktop or on their mobile device. Now, we also have another thing called affinity segments, or affinity audiences. And affinity audiences are great simply because within Google affinity audiences, it is all first-party data. So we at Google obviously have a large swath of owned and operated and partner data that we can tap into to really truly understand who these audiences are and how they're interacting across all digital mediums to effectively talk to them about your product and about your individual show. And the best thing about that data and how we can tap in and talk to them is it's not third-party data, it's first-party data, and it's free. So there's no added value cost to use as marketers to run any sort of programmatic buy or display buy or even TrueView against these affinity audiences. It's free data accessible to you guys as marketers to talk to these people and have an effective conversation with them. Next stage is think, and these are people who are actively thinking about attending a performing arts event, arts and theater event. And when people are thinking about going to an arts and theater event, we found, and this is really interesting because this differs very much across all live events, but we found that people were very torn between what live event they actually want to attend. And 57% of the time, when they asked them which event you want to attend, they couldn't actually tell you which live event they wanted to attend. And when we look at the ticketing, when we ask them specifically which shows they're looking to attend, still in that case, they didn't actually know what show they wanted to attend. So with arts and theater and with performing arts, you guys in the room here need to have that conversation with them to influence them to specifically go to your show, because the theater buyer, the arts and theater buyer, and the performing arts ticket buyer is very undecided in terms of which ticket they actually want to buy. And there's a lot of shows out there. And you also have to keep in mind in the span of all live events, as I mentioned before, arts and theater and performing arts buyers aren't just arts and theater performing buyers. They're also foodies. Sometimes they go to sports games. Sometimes they like to go visit their mom and buy a plane ticket instead. All of this has to be kept in mind when you're talking to them, but when it comes to the arts and theater performing arts events, they're considering 2 tickets on average. So you need to make sure that you're having a conversation and feeding them the most relevant information at that point in time so that they can actually buy a ticket and convert for your individual show. And when we look at what that research involved and how long it took place, we found that the window of time where most of the research for these live events is taking place is a 2-week window. Now, this 2-week window isn't just 2 weeks right around the on sale. It's not just 2 weeks right before the on sale, after the on sale, 2 months before the on sale. It's an arbitrary 2 weeks. So these people are out there looking for valid information on shows and very arts and theater events for a 2-week time period that's arbitrary floating around out there, which makes it even more important for you as marketers to optimize your YouTube channel and make sure that you're in places where they go. So these review sites on search have the most relevant information out there that they can tap into very quickly and easily to find that relevant information and ultimately purchase a ticket because of that relevant information for your show. The internet is always the first stop for research nowadays. Obviously, all of you probably have mobile phones in here, and you also are all on your desktops, or a lot of you guys are on your desktop computers. So this is the reason why, because we spend an average of about 5 hours a day on our desktop computers across all of the United States. And that doesn't seem like a huge number, but you keep in mind also that we have mobile devices and tablets and other things like that. So it stands to reason, of course, that performing arts theater buyers are starting with the internet first. And all of them, for the most part, or the biggest portion of them are actually turning the internet first and foremost above any other medium out there. And then when we look at also where they're at, what they're actually doing while they are online, and this is the case for everybody in here once again, because once again, you guys are all consumers just like everybody else out there buying these tickets. It's very broken apart. So when you are watching TV, when you go home and you watch your favorite show on TV, how many of you guys are actively using your mobile phone or your tablet? Right, the majority in your room. And once again, your consumers. So you have to think about what those people are doing and how distracted they are from that task of researching for that particular live event, and make sure you're having that conversation with them across each and every platform that you can possibly talk to them. So mobile, tablet, desktop, etc. The metrics that eMarketer pushes out there basically said that 77% of the time when someone is watching TV, they're actively involved across some other device. But 75% of the time when they're on their tablet, they're also actively involved with some other form of media. And then 57% of the time, when they're on their mobile device, they're actively involved in some other form of media. So it's not just the internet that's important. You do have to think about the TV plan, et cetera. But you have to think about what those consumers are doing, the various touch points they have while they're researching for that live event, and making sure you're breaking through the clutter and having that conversation with them. But with all this research, we also found that, of course, mobile comes first, because mobile is the first thing that is in pocket while you're out there walking around, while you're at an arts and a theater event, while you guys are in the room listening to me talk. It's the easiest thing and the most accessible thing that you can find information for any particular live event. And in terms of what they're looking at when they're finding that research information, or when they're researching for that information, 18% of the time they actually turn to search engines, and the rest of the time they're playing around with social networking. Now, the social aspect is really interesting because we all play around on social media. Probably most of you guys play around on Facebook, but some of you guys, I assume, play around on Google Plus as well. The important part to remember is social is a channel access. So it is that influencer, and it creates awareness, particularly for your product and for your particular show. But the most places where people are using it, and this is the reason why Facebook, of course, has done a really good job of just being profitable in general on mobile devices, because it's become their primary channel to push information out. So you have to think about what your social strategy is and how you're educating those users on social, especially simply because of this, because people are turning to their smartphone devices first and foremost, and not only they're searching, but they're also playing around with social networking. Have any of you guys in the room here heard of the zero moment of truth philosophy? There's a couple of you, the capacity folks too. Yeah, so the zero moment of truth philosophy is essentially it was a book actually written by a Googler named Jim Lazinski a couple of years back. And what it tells you is that there are various channels that influence a consumer's ultimate purchase decision. So when you as consumers and when arts and theater and performing arts marketers are out there looking for something to buy, a ticket to buy for a specific show, but you don't know what show you want to go to, there's many different options, especially if you're here in New York, but if you're in any big city out there, there's a ton of different options to do on any given night, not only for arts and theater events, but for everything else out there. So you as consumers have to go out and shrink that consideration set almost immediately, because you can't do every event that's out there at any given point in time. So you shrink that set. Then you move into what we call as the zero moment of truth phase. And the zero moment of truth phase is essentially where that person, that buyer, you as consumers, take it and expand upon that initial consideration set. Because you're bringing in information you find on search engines, you're finding information on blogs, and you're also finding information on social networking sites. And that consideration set is ultimately what you buy a ticket for. But even more interesting is that after you bought that ticket, after you purchased the ticket for that particular live event, if you have an amazing experience at the live event, everything from parking at the event to the show itself, maybe the concessions were amazing, the company you had there was amazing, and you leave and you're just on this amazing high from seeing this awesome show, you were just there, you can actually create what's called a loyalty loop. And that loyalty loop limits the conversation you need to have with that consumer in the future. And I know a lot of you marketers out there probably have that loyalty loop created to some extent with a lot of the marketing you do now. But the neat thing is that person has now become a dedicated buyer. So you no longer have to have all these other conversations, the zero moment of truth touch point, and then the purchase, because they're always going to go back to your theater and buy a ticket specifically for your theater. And that's the challenge that a lot of marketers put up with. But even more interesting than that is that when they bought that ticket, they had a great experience. Not only does it create a loyalty loop where they go back and talk to you more often and look at your shows more often than any other channel, but it also feeds back into what they put up on social media. So the social media side of things is uber important because you actually because of that feedback loop that is created, and also because it feeds back into a decision for somebody else who's making a purchase decision in the future. And when we look at how people are interacting on their smartphone devices, we found the majority of people, of course, in performing arts, and this is once again just coming back to performing arts, prefer actually a website over an app. And this was a bit surprising because when we looked at all the other live events categories out there, from sports to concerts, this was actually a 50-50 split between apps and the website itself. And I'll kind of get into some reasons why we think this is the case a little bit later on. But it's important to realize that you as arts marketers out there need to have that mobile optimized experience to ensure that when they're on your website, that they can find the data they're actually looking for and have that effective research process take place. And then the other half like to use a browser. This is specifically, once again, to performing arts. And then when we looked at just what they're doing in terms of social media, and this is on mobile devices, we found that 22% do their little liking on Facebook, which is, again, influential to the decisions that people make in the future, and that 22% of them out there are actually viewing photos on it. But keep in mind, when people are posting photos on there and when they're out there liking these photos and looking at these photos, this is just simply creating awareness for those events and creating awareness for future events, just like we talked about the C phase. So think actually will feed back into the C phase to create that awareness for everybody else out there who is a performing arts fan but doesn't necessarily know what show they want to attend. And then back to the video aspect, and I had a long whole spiel, but the YouTube folks actually stole it from me. But what they're talking about, one they actually talked about, is very, very important to keep in mind, because the use of online video is very important in the research process, and most importantly, it is that consideration set. So it helps them actually consider and attend that specific show if you have that sight, sound, and motion effect. And I know there's a lot of issues out there with content and content creation with some of the theaters and the various unions out there, but working these into contracts and getting these conversations started around content and having this video content available before the show even comes out is very important for influencing consideration for your specific show and getting people to attend your specific show. And then obviously optimizing your whole YouTube channel experience. Online influence, of course, influences purchase behavior more so than anything else. And I think the interesting thing about this slide and the main takeaway from it is that online behavior ultimately results in a purchase. So the bane of being digital is that you are trackable, and most of you guys probably are digital marketers here. But the problem with digital media is that it is trackable, and it's not always seen as kind of a higher funnel tracking, a higher funnel channel, just getting awareness out about something like TV does. But the reality is you can track it back to actual purchases. So when this influence happens, people think more favorably about shows, and they ultimately end up making a purchase as a result of thinking favorably about that show. So it includes the consideration set. And then when we go back to the social media side, Facebook has obviously rolled out their video platform, which we also consider rich media, not necessarily video. But when we look at the channels and where people are turning to first and foremost for social media information versus video information, the Ipsos data showed us that, no surprise, people are turning to Facebook, but Google Plus was a second. And then, yeah, YouTube over Facebook after that. One thing I should mention, by the way, and I personally don't think Google Plus, I don't have a lot on Google Plus in this presentation, but one thing I should mention is that it definitely should not be a channel you guys forget. Facebook gets a lot of attention, and I know that Facebook is a great platform for a lot of marketers, and it's very seamless. It's a seamless platform for marketers, and there's a lot of paid media formats you can push behind it on Facebook. But there's a lot of reports out there, and one that eWeb actually pushed out last year stated that channels that had a Google Plus presence, a substantial Google Plus presence, and spent the time curating their Google Plus channel, actually had 3 times more consumer spend on Google Plus than Facebook. So you as arts marketers know that most theater tickets are not cheap. They can be an expensive buy, and it's a big decision for some people to make out there. So if you haven't actually thought about optimizing and going out and pushing bits of your Google Plus page and accessing and putting up more content on there and just kind of curating it, just like you would do with your YouTube channel, it certainly is worth the investment because we've seen it work for other arts marketers out there, and it's definitely working well for a lot of the music labels and the music channels out there as well. Sony Music's a great example of that. In terms of where people are turning to first and foremost, the search engines are the first channel that people turn to, and of course Google being the largest search engine out there, it stands to reason that they turn to Google first. But a lot of the information they find is also on review sites. And this speaks to you as art marketers really understanding what those review sites are and actually going on to Google search and doing a search for exactly your brand and your theater and understanding what is out there in the digital realm about your arts and theater venue or your performing arts venue, because curating what those review sites say and kind of curating the whole search experience is all the more important when this is the first place people are talking to have research and to find information about a particular performing arts show. ad recall, this is an interesting conversation. So TV, everybody knows that kind of TV is losing subscribership, specifically cable subscribership. But ad recall in general has also taken a hit over the last couple of years. Since our 2012 study that we did, we found that traditional TV recall has gone down 19%, or gone down from 19%, which is a slight downtick, but we think a lot of it just has to do simply with engagement as well. So once again, coming back to the whole thing, the proliferation of devices and what people are accessing while they're watching TV is important to remember, because ad recall has gone down on TV. Ad recall has also gone down when we looked at newspaper, when we looked at satellite radio, when we looked at radio in general. Those numbers are right around, same thing as TV, right around 17% or so. But online ad recall has actually stayed consistent. And a lot of this comes down to, one, native advertising, but two, just placing your advertising and being a savvy marketer and placing it in the right place to have that conversation with the consumer and have them ultimately recall your ad and recall that particular show that they should attend and think about attending that show. So what do you do to capture these people in the think stage, these folks who are actually thinking about attending a live event show or a live performing arts show? Well, search, remarketing, and mobile are definitely the most important things to think about. And breaking it down, the mobile search, because it's the first place they stop when they're looking to buy and research and find information about a performing arts ticket, it's important to have the kind of little bits and pieces in there that add in this holistic experience. And I'm not sure if you guys talked about this at all, kind of the optimizations for search, et cetera, in this thing a little bit. But having this kind of stuff and making sure you're actually in the #1 position for mobile devices is very important. Very soon, we're going to have what happens, we're going to have what we call the mobile moment happen with Google. You guys all know that Google is a huge search engine, and there's a lot of searches that take place on there every day. But sometime right around the holidays in December here, we're going to have this mobile moment where mobile queries on google.com will actually surpass desktop, which means more people are interested in looking at information and finding information on their phones for search than on desktop devices, which makes it even more important to understand that you need to be there in those 1 or 2 positions. In the top 2 positions, have call extensions to drive those call throughs to your theater when they find that relevant information, and then add those local extensions so that they can find maybe specifically that theater or get directions to that theater when they want to go to that specific show. And then remarketing, and I'm sure there's been 1,000 conversations here today about remarketing because it's very important to your bottom line and to your business line. But when people attend, or when people go to your website and visit your websites, of course they're pixeled. So you know that they went to their you went to their website, you know what they did on that website, you know the actions they take, the places they went to on that page. The great thing about remarketing lists for search ads is because you know what actions they took on your website and you have them pixeled, you can effectively create and curate the content to tailor it specifically to what they looked at, and maybe even find that price point that matches what they would probably buy. So they're going to the Cinderella page, because I know Cinderella's not up anymore, but the Cinderella page, and they're looking specifically at the premium seats on the Cinderella page. Well, you know that action, and guess what? You now have that pixel on them. You can create an ad to specifically say, premium tickets on sale for Cinderella, 20% off, get them today, and boom, you have actually captured them. Because once again, search is the first place they go to, and if they go back to search to find more information about shows, you'll have that remarketing, that pixel up there, that list, that remarketing list for search ad up there to capture their attention and have them have research or create research specifically on your site and buy tickets on your site. And then these in-market audiences, I think, are phenomenal. Once again, we spend about 5 hours a day online, and the average consumer, and this is just for retail as a whole, but the average consumer goes to about 10 different sites or 10 different channels before they ultimately make a purchase, a retail purchase. And that convolutes the conversation. This is no longer a traditional marketing funnel where you can kind of feed them down easily, have them a conversation, because there's so many different touch points. Well, with our in-market audiences tool, we actually have this algorithm we wrote, which essentially decides the difference between interest and actual intent to buy a ticket. So you can break these people into and talk to arts and theater lovers, people who are out there who are trying to book flights, but are booking a flight specifically to your city, which means they're going to be in market at some point in time and probably have interest to buy tickets for your show. And you can segment them out and have that conversation with them at the end of their journey, which is where you want to be, at the end of the journey and at the beginning of the journey while they're researching. And I'm kind of blowing through this stuff, by the way, so at the end, if you guys have any questions on these, I'm more than happy to answer them. Do is people who are buying tickets to a performing arts event. And this is a big bucket of people as well, but obviously a very confused bucket because they're still trying to decide between two different events that they actually want to attend. People still buy primarily on the computers, but I'm going to get into this a little bit later, and this is a very important thing to think about for you as arts marketers, is that 1 in 3 of them are on their mobile devices looking up future events for live events as a whole while they're at the event itself. So that speaks to in-market researching. It's a 2-week window. You can kind of do the math, do the algorithm in your head, and realize that, hey, a lot of these people are actually in market while they're at the event, while they're attending this event or just post-event, almost immediately, so that 2-week window comes up. But the reality is that, of course, the important thing to remember is that they're buying tickets on their computers primarily. And where they're buying it tends to fall within about a month of the show itself. So 76% of the time, they purchase within the show itself, even though the research process can take months within that arbitrary 2-week window. And then also where they're buying tickets is much more so on mobile and tablet. And this is happening simply because the mobile moment's happening and our access to information on our mobile devices has become that much easier. How many of you guys actually have purchased a movie ticket or an arts and theater ticket on your mobile phone recently? Wow, that's a lot of you. We got a lot of savvy marketers in the room here. That's great. So you know, so maybe not for you guys, but maybe I deal with this more than anything else. So you know that there are a lot of issues, of course, with purchasing on your mobile devices. It could be just simplicity of the purchase itself. It could be putting information in there is very difficult to do. And I think a lot of this stuff is actually going to be addressed later on. But when we surveyed all these people out there who looked and researched and found information on their mobile devices and asked them exactly why they didn't purchase a ticket on their mobile device, what we found is that there were 3 main inhibitors. And it's something very important to think about as arts marketers. One is they just had a preference for another device. So, hey, I researched on my mobile device, I found all this great information, but I really only wanted to buy this ticket on my desktop because I'm just more comfortable with the security on my desktop. Or I want to buy it while I'm watching a TV show on my tablet device. But they always start at mobile, but they often have a preference for another device. The other problem is, of course, just difficulty entering information on a smartphone. And I think we as Google and, of course, Apple as well have done a great job of kind of addressing this. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to play around with the NFC stuff that Apple Wallet rolled out recently. They're accepting it at Target, I think, or maybe Target's pushing back. I'm not an iPhone, obviously. I don't have an iPhone, but I work at Google, come on. Yeah, so they have the NFC stuff, which will address a lot of this stuff. And then Google Wallet as well is a great opportunity to kind of simplify this process and make sure that they don't have to put in the information. If they're logged in on their device, they can easily just hit pay, and there's no information actually entered, and they can purchase the ticket. Because usability in general, that information buying is an impossible process. And I personally have had many horror stories. I'm a huge Broadway fan and a huge theater fan in general, which is one of the reasons I'm probably standing up here. But I went on and tried to buy a ticket for a Broadway show the other day on a specific site, which I won't mention, on my mobile device. And I literally could not buy a ticket for the show because I couldn't, 1, fat finger it in to get the data in there. 2, when I tried to sign out, I still couldn't get the sign out page to show up because it wasn't centered. So when you don't have a mobile optimized site, people are going to bounce away from your site and ultimately go to another site or buy discounted on StubHub or even pay $1,000 more on StubHub for that particular ticket. And I think it's sad. I honestly think it's sad because you want those people to buy tickets for your show. You know that they're researching on mobile devices for your show. That's the first place they turn is mobile devices for your show. And there should be relevant information for them to find on their mobile device about your show. But when we looked at people who eventually bought tickets for the show, only 1 in 5 people ended up buying a ticket for the show, even though they started their entire research process on their mobile device. Most of them started their entire mobile device. And this number is astronomically higher, ironically, in both the concerts and sports space. So we see approximately 2 in 5 when we look at concerts, and almost 3 in 5 buy a ticket on their mobile device for sports and for concerts consecutively. So what does this say about the performing arts industry? It means that there needs to be kind of a conversation that happens throughout the industry and for you guys as arts marketers about thinking mobile first. We have an average of 1.5 million Android devices that are activated every single day. And at some point in time, and I think this might have already happened within the last week or 2, there are more mobile devices in the United States than there are people in the United States. That's a big number, and it means there's a lot of devices out there for people to have a conversation on and find access to information. But you need to ensure that they have that optimized experience so that they can easily buy and that this doesn't happen. Because even if they will go 2%, 3% of them, 4%, go out and actually buy a ticket on their desktop, you're still losing a lot of people in this mobile stage of the research process and the buying process. Back to kind of the internet as a whole, this number speaks for itself, but as a source, the internet in general tends to be the #1 source across the board for where people find information for the specific arts and theater purchase, ticket purchase. When 50% of the respondents out there say, yes, I turn to the internet first, that's a big number. And of course, then you have every other channel out there they can access, they can tap into: the newspapers, the billboards, the TV, the radio, print, etc. And then it also comes as no surprise that search engines are the #1 source for information across the board. And 77% of the people auctions taken ultimately result in a ticket purchase. And that's as simple as when they're on there, they know what they're putting in there. They know what information they're looking for. They're searching for this Broadway show. They're searching for the Cinderella ticket. They're searching for a ticket for BAM. All this information is there at their fingertips, and they can ultimately make a purchase from it. So it stands to reason, of course, that 77% of the time when they're on search and they actually click on that ad, they ultimately buy a ticket from that particular search. And then when we look at information gathering, we still saw that social and video are very influential in the purchase decision, but they're still the channels that people turn to most simply just to find information. So 66% of the respondents out there said that social is one of the #1 sources for information and what they turn to. And then 68% of the time, people turn to video just to find that sight, sound, and motion, that engagement factor that really gets them thinking about going specifically to that one performing arts or that Broadway show. The other channels out there are still kind of seeing diminishing returns. And by the way, I know I'm kind of bashing a little bit on like the traditional media side. I am the Google guy up here, I know. But you still need to keep in mind that these channels are absolutely relevant, that digital still should make a play for a piece of your budget, but it should be first part of your budget, because when people are turning to the internet and they're thinking about the internet first and foremost, they're turning to digital media, they're turning to the internet. So think about it first and foremost, and all these other ancillary channels, they absolutely do make an impact, and there are awareness and there are tickets driven by these various channels. But the reality is, most of the time, people purchase tickets 53% of the time after seeing an online ad, as opposed to satellite radio or even radio and TV, etc. And this number, 38% you see here, is just terrestrial radio. When we look at satellite radio, when we look at online radio, the number is even lower than that. And when we look at newspaper, the number was like right around 17% of people who actually purchased a ticket after seeing a newspaper ad about that specific ticket. So think digital first, but keep in mind that they should be part of a more holistic media plan. So with the do stage, we talk a lot about search. If you're converting people on search 77% of the time, they're going to buy a ticket for a performing arts event because of search. Well, then you should think about search first. And it stands to reason that with this much growth that we're having on Google.com when it comes to Broadway shows overall, and this doesn't even aggregate all the performing arts shows, which, by the way, I did really want to pull that number for this particular conference because I know a lot of you guys are coming from all over the United States for it. We couldn't aggregate the information fast enough because there's a lot of arts and theater venues out there. But when information we did aggregate, actually this number was a little bit higher than that, just from the few of the major DMAs we did pull. But it just shows you that people do have interest still in Broadway shows and still have a lot of interest in the performing arts. And with those numbers growing that much, just over a 4-year time period, and the mobile moment happening in December, you need to think about where you are in relation to that search and to that query, and if people are actually being captured when they're searching for information on a Broadway show, on an arts and theater show, and on a performing arts show. So we always recommend to make sure that you, of course, are at the top slot, because the top slot is the place that people go to and click on the most when they're looking for information on any show. And this is our brand new Google musical. You guys have probably seen the ads in the taxis if you've been driving around Ann Arbor. It's called Lollipop. But no, this is just a great example. And I think even more so, this is a great example of kind of an optimized experience for it. Is you can have these site links below it, which take you directly to more relevant information that the consumer could be searching for. Perhaps the newest show that's coming out that you really want to promote and push a little bit more. You can have that up there in these site links. But what they all do is they actually create more space at the top and help people find more relevant information about the show they're looking for. Now, the care stage here is, once again, something that people forget about all the time. We get them in venue, we sell them a ticket, and then, yes, we can send them a newsletter as a follow-up later on, but they already bought a ticket to the show, and hopefully they had a great experience. Well, that isn't the reality. They all have, well, hopefully all have a great experience. I always have great experiences when I go to performing arts. But the interesting thing is, when we looked at just what consumers are doing and what these performing arts ticket buyers are doing while they're at the venue, 1 in 2 of them are researching future events while they're at that performing arts event or just immediately after. Now, if we go back to the whole see-think phase where they're performing arts fans, but they haven't necessarily figured out what show they're going to, this is your opportunity as arts marketers to have a conversation with them in venue on their mobile devices, which they're playing around with whether you like it or not, and looking up information for future shows, because it's a 2-week arbitrary window, okay? If 1 and 2 of them are out there looking for active information at the venue itself at a given point in time, that means they've started the research process. They are now the first day of that arbitrary 2-week window into buying a ticket for their next show. And what are you doing to actually guarantee that they buy a show for your specific venue and not somebody else out there? Because keep in mind, they still don't know what show they want to go to. They're torn kind of between 2 different events, 2 different shows. They're already in your venue. You want to make sure you're talking to them, having a conversation with them, and have a relevant conversation with them so they can find that information while they're looking for it, searching on their mobile devices in venue. The main activities, though, that we did find that they're doing while they're in venue is, 1, they are engaged just in a broad range of online activities. So that could be anything from searching email, which, once again, there's a good opportunity to talk to them by sending them an email while they're in the venue. We know you bought a ticket here, check out our new shows, you're looking at your phone right now, and boom, you got an email from the venue you're in. Thanks for coming out today. Have you seen this show? It's very similar to this next show coming up. If you like this show, check out these other ones. But in general, they're just engaging on online activities. So a lot of that is social, and that was actually the biggest bucket, is they're giving that feedback. And the important thing about this little social bucket here is that it's feeding back into that whole feedback loop. So not only can you create a loyalty loop from those actions they're taking in the theater, those social actions they're taking in the theater, but you can also create feedback into that 0 moment of truth to influence other consumers' decisions in the future. And I know it's a big object of contention with a lot of theaters out there, especially here in New York City, that having people active on their mobile devices is not encouraged on it. Nobody likes people talking on their mobile devices. But if you allow, of course, some actions on mobile devices, that means they have more chance to find information about the relevant show and about what they're doing or what they're looking at and what they're seeing, as well as what they can see in the future at your particular venue at that particular point in time. And then, of course, posting videos and posting content and posting photos is what everybody does here. Well, maybe not everybody. There's some selfies out there, I'm assuming, at the venue. But posting photos and posting online activities, comments on social networks still is actually the #1 thing that people are doing in the venue there. But it feeds back into that 0 moment of truth. People can get feedback from it. It feeds into their family, their friends, et cetera, and they ultimately buy a ticket for a live event because of this information they find on social. So how do we care? Well, of course, it stands to reason that we want to talk to them where they are on their mobile devices at that given point in time. So we need to care for them by, 1, just making sure that you create awareness for future events while they're at the venue looking for information about future events. So this is a great example of what we have at Google called custom brand exchange. And essentially, we have agreements with a lot of the big arts and theater, big entertainment magazines like Rolling Stone out there, et cetera, where you can buy inventory on these magazines to actually, through Google, across all of these different magazines, exchanges, et cetera, you can buy it through Google to actually have a holistic conversations with people, because you as arts marketers know who these people are for the most part by the time you get them into your theater, because they bought a ticket through you. You got their address, you got their geographic information, you got a lot of information about them, you even have their email address. So you know probably from that and from uploading a lot of information to Facebook and the other marketing channels you have that they take certain actions in their daily life. So by buying various properties throughout sort of what those actions are, through the custom brand exchange or just on the Google Display Network, you have a great opportunity to really create awareness for these future shows and capture their attention while they're in the venue, just having social activities, having conversations, and just doing those general online activities. And then the mobile GDN, which is the mobile Google Display Network, and AdMob are other great opportunities. We saw before that they're kind of split between whether they want to go into apps, but a lot of people are playing around on apps. In fact, I was just at Curious Incident on Monday night, and the whole row in front of me was a bunch of younger people who were literally playing around on their little mobile apps games during the whole intermission. They didn't even get up, they just put it on mobile apps. Now, I'm not saying this is just a younger demographic thing, because some of them we were watching video. It is older demographic as well, and actually one metric I forgot to throw out a little bit earlier there is, for those of you guys who are New York Times readers, it's a big newspaper here in New York, they actually posted an article back in September that cited a Nielsen study that talked about how engagement with video content is no longer just a younger demographic. It's actually the older demographic as well. So they found that on average, 50 to 64-year-olds spend about 20 minutes a day accessing online video and watching online videos. And some of you have probably heard this story before. I know a lot of you guys in the room have probably heard this story before, but I have a 92-year-old grandmother who is obsessed with YouTube. Part of it is because she thinks her grandson creates all the videos on YouTube. But the coolest part about it is she actually knows how to use the platform, and she's 92 years old. It's not that difficult of a platform to actually use. It's just a matter of optimizing it as marketers that can be often difficult. But these people, this older demographic, this older set is becoming more and more involved with video content. And this is a great opportunity to actually talk to them while they're on their mobile devices at the event itself with video content that is relevant and engaging to them. My grandmother may be one of those digital influencers out there, but there are also other digital influencers out there who are in that age range that are maybe considered to be the atypical theater buyer. But the reality is, and of course, the important thing to remember is they are still engaged on video content. So engaging them with video content on AdMob, in-app, in games, that sight, sound, and motion play you can make to keep them entertained, and of course show them what the next show it looks like that's coming up. And then across the mobile GDN, you can also have various ads that are engaging content, that can play video content behind them, et cetera, to talk to those users and keep them engaged while they're at the venue itself. And then last, or I think second to last on this, is having that mobile optimized experience optimized. So at the intermission, if they find that information that they're looking for about the next show that's coming up, they think it's an amazing show, I already like what I'm seeing here, maybe I should just buy tickets for it now, you have to give them the opportunity to take action on that search, because 77% of the time when they're searching for something, it ultimately results in a purchase for performing arts tickets. So you want to make sure you have the click to call, the site links, the app downloads, anything that can keep them in your ecosystem and help them actually have a conversation with somebody about that ticket purchase, because they've already researched for it. Now it's just a matter of clicking on the ad and actually calling the phone number to buy a ticket while I'm waiting here during intermission or just immediately after the show. Having a site link to the show itself that's running, or the next 3 or 4 shows that are running, to show them exactly what inventory you guys have out there, to have them buy a ticket for the show. And then if you do have an app, push them to download apps. I know there's some partnerships that exist out there with the various ticketers and the various theaters. Could be a good opportunity to have them download a Ticketmaster app so that you know that they're getting qualified information from that Ticketmaster app or from the Ticket Web app. So therefore, when they buy a ticket, they're already in app, the experience is already in app, and then they can not only benefit from that experience, but you guys can benefit from the experience of them having a ticket bought through that app. And then the bid by distance, and we call this proximity targeting. This is a very important thing to remember as marketers, because once again, more than likely somebody from New York City is not going to fly to Des Moines, Iowa for a particular show. So you need to talk to the people in the area that they are at that given point in time with the relevant information that they need to find at that given point in time. And I'm just going to use Broadway as an example here because we're right here in New York and Times Square is there. But a great example of this is just simply talking to people within the Times Square area, making sure that they have information about whatever Broadway show is running in their area at that given point in time. And it literally is as simple as just increasing your bids for a specific geographic area, which is approximately a quarter mile, I think, around the area is what we can actually target at Google with a conversation with those users on their mobile devices in the area that you want to have a conversation with them. So that's across search, that's across the MGDN, et cetera, but you can actually proximity target them to talk to them in your area at any given point in time. And then circling back on the Google Plus thing, we also have a paid format that's important, because if they are out there engaging, and yes, they are engaging on Facebook, but they are also engaging on Google Plus, you need to get out there and push that Google Plus content out to them, because you always want to have a conversation with these people. It could be Facebook, but it could be Google Plus. And the simplest solution we have is, if you want to drive subscribers, if you want to have this conversation, you want to create impressions and create a conversation with the consumer about your show, we have these things called Google Plus promoted posts, which basically bring the Google Plus experience out to the user in the display network and have them see the feed or a specific post. So if you have somebody who posted a ridiculously amazing view, you think it's great, you think it's eloquent, you think it might be the best thing you've seen since sliced bread, then you're going to go out and actually promote that ad. So you're going to put that up, have it feed into the Google Display Network, and promote that ad. And not only will the person get more excited about it, but you as a brand, people will get more excited about your brand, because they say, wait, look, somebody out there is actually talking about it, and this theater is promoting my what I just said on their page. This is so cool. And then the conversation continues. You can feed back into that whole loyalty loop as well as a zero moment of truth conversation. And then you can also just extend your reach by simply having engaging content. So if you have a Cirque du Soleil show going up or any other really cool show going up there, and you're posting on your Google Plus page, you maybe only have so many followers on the page, you just simply tap into the content and feed it right into your Google Display Network campaign, and boom, you have that engagement factor. You can drive subscribers onto your channel and of course onto buying a ticket. So this is the bucket. This is everything. We kind of break it out. I know this has probably been a lot of information, but as long as you as marketers kind of think about it as, we spend all this time, we spend all this information, or we spend all this time kind of aggregating this information, really trying to understand consumers. This study itself will help you understand consumers, and the information you saw hopefully did help you understand consumers. But keep in mind that those consumers still need to have an amazing time at the venue. And if they do have an amazing time, they are going to create that loyalty loop. They are going to go back to your theater, and they are going to give feedback on social media, maybe post some videos on YouTube, etc. But it's all about kind of curating that environment for them and using various forms of paid media to do this. One of my favorite quotes out there that I read in a recent article was, if you ask an actor about any given show, they almost always answer in the context of the audience. So if you as marketers really want these actors and all these people who put this hard work into creating these amazing shows to have an amazing experience and answer positively in the context of an audience, then go out there and do what you're good at and understand those consumers and sell tickets for the show and have a sold out house.